So now we can say for sure that geopolitics did not disappear after the end of the Cold War. Geopolitics remained as a scientific approach and as a foreign policy practice. And we can conclude that by this time we have learned three main stages of evolution of geopolitics. The first stage was traditional geopolitics, the second, the Cold War geopolitics or classical geopolitics, and the third, something that we call contemporary geopolitics. We remember that there were certain differences between the traditional and classical geopolitics. Let's try to think how contemporary geopolitics looks like. Does it have more in common with the traditional or with the classical approach? Let's first compare contemporary geopolitics with the traditional one. First, we can say that in traditional geopolitics, states were thinking much more about their expansion. They considered themselves as the living organisms, according to organic theories, that should expand in order to survive. States were focused much more on struggle for resources and control over trade routes, which were extremely important for their survival. In contemporary geopolitics, we can agree that resources and trade routes are still important. However, states do not think anymore about the expansion. They do not consider themselves as the living organisms. They consider the whole world as a closed system where they compete with each other, and that's why such concepts as balance of power are more relevant to describe the contemporary geopolitics. To prove that, we can remember approach of Russell Walter Mead and his view on the revisionist powers, how they try to contest the influence of the United States. Here's the example how balance of power is still relevant to describe the international relations. It looks like contemporary geopolitics has many more similarities with the Cold War geopolitics or the classical geopolitics. For example, during the Cold War, when we describe this period, we are speaking about the bipolar competition between the USSR and the Soviet Union. Today, it looks like a multipolar competition, but still a geopolitical competition between the great powers. During the Cold War, the main factor of competition, one of the main factors was ideological competition between the two superpowers. Today, we can find many factors of this competition, many different concepts that describe why states decide to compete with each other, but still the logic is still the same. It is about division of the whole world into us and them. In the age of classical or Cold War geopolitics, it was about the worldwide balance of power between the great powers. Today, it is a little bit different. States are focused much more on their regional stability, regional security, and they try to maintain regional balance of power. However, we can agree that there are still states like the United States, maybe China and Russia, who are thinking globally in terms of global balance of power. All in all, we can say that contemporary geopolitics, the word contemporary, describes the period of time, something that happens right now, and can be compared with the Cold War geopolitics, which described the period of the Cold War. While when we're speaking about the main principles of geopolitics, the main concepts, the main logic of geopolitical competition between countries, contemporary geopolitics is extremely close to the Cold War geopolitics, and they together can be called classical geopolitics or classical geopolitical approach to international relations. It is not easy, however, to answer the question, what is contemporary geopolitics? In the times of traditional geopolitics, of the Cold War geopolitics, as well as now, there is no universally accepted definition of this word. That's why some people believe that geopolitics is something that broadly describes the influence of geographic factors on foreign policy of the state. The others try to focus on certain peculiar aspects of this influence, for example, on resources, on trade routes, and how technologies shape impact of these factors on international relations. So All in all, we can agree that without a universal definition, geopolitics is some sort of influence of geographic factors on foreign policy of states and on international relations at large. We have used the terms geography and geopolitics so often that it is very important now to distinguish between them. Geography is a physical reality around us. It describes the geological features of the Earth, like rivers, mountains, other aspects of landscape. Geopolitics, in contrast, is the human factor within geography. It shows the same aspects, like rivers, mountains, resources, trade routes, however, through the lens of their strategic importance to certain countries. What is also very important, geopolitics is not constant. It changes. It can be changed with the development of new technologies. For example, like it was in the times of the Cold War, when the sense of security was changed with the appearance of such technologies as airplanes, missiles, and the nuclear weapons. Yet we know that geopolitics can describe, on the one hand, a scientific approach to study of international relations, and on the other hand, a foreign policy approach, a foreign policy practice. In order to distinguish between these two categories, let's add one more term, which is geostrategy. The term geostrategy was widely used, especially in the times of the Cold War, because geostrategy describes the foreign policy of the state, the geographic direction of this foreign policy, where a state concentrates its efforts by projecting military power and directing diplomatic activity. That's why when we hear the word geostrategy, it usually means the geopolitical practice. When we use the word geopolitics, we should specify whether we're speaking about a scientific, purely scientific approach, or we mean something about foreign policy practice. So, what is contemporary geopolitics? First, it is a scientific approach that provides instruments, theories to study international relations and to give certain recommendations to foreign policymakers. When we're speaking about purely foreign policy, we usually use the word geostrategy. Second, geopolitics, contemporary geopolitics, deals with distribution of power, security and strength of states like it was in the times of the Cold War geopolitics. By saying this, we mean that contemporary geopolitics continues the classical tradition of evolution of this scientific approach. As we have mentioned in the previous lecture, geopolitics is very close to the realist approach. They both within the same realist family of international relations theories. However, in contrast to realism, geopolitics still focuses on geographic characteristics of states and their power, paying much more attention to their location, to distance, and some other aspects. While geopolitics in the times of the Cold War focused on bipolar competition between the United States and the USSR, contemporary geopolitics has a number of different issues to study. For example, as we have mentioned, contemporary geopoliticians study the influence of redistribution of power on emergence of revisionist states and how these states try to contest the influence of the United States, the only existing superpower. Contemporary geopolitics also studies emergence of new centers of power and how this shape of power changes the geopolitical picture of the contemporary world.